For RABI, we felt it was really important to gather the information from farming people about the challenges and the impacts of those challenges so that we could get a really good understanding and evidence base. It was a survey of a generation, so we received over 15,000 responses from the farming community across England and Wales, which was unprecedented. The reality is that these results tell us what we probably already knew, that this was hiding in plain sight.
As project lead on the Big Farming Survey, I believe we can all contribute to creating a better future for farming people by addressing the issues raised in the report. No single organisation can do this alone. It's why we must all work together to create a better future for farming people. Farming community is resilient. We need to focus on that and build on it.
As a farmer who's had my own struggles with mental health issues, I fully understand the challenges that so many of us are going through in the farming community. Farming isn't just a job, it's our whole life. It's everything we do from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go to bed at night, and at times that can be overwhelming. It's why we must work together to normalise the conversations around mental health in the farming community. It's just got to realise that asking for help is fine. I did it, and the people around me helped me so much to get through it, and it can affect any of us at any time, whether it be young or old. When faced with such widespread adversity, it's surely time for all of us to support those who are trying to take a proactive approach to solving some of the issues raised in this survey.
Back in 2018, my dad went down with a stroke, resulted in him to stop farming, and then resulted in me to take over the farm and carry it on. It was quite of a challenge. It was very daunting. Everything just got on top of you and you got a bit overwhelmed. So it was like I just sort of reached rock bottom really, and yeah, it was quite hard. So I reached out onto Twitter. I realised that there's a lot more people out there that are battling the same, and I think it is really important that people should start talking a lot more and start normalising that it's fine to talk. You know, there's nothing wrong about it.
RSABI supports people within the agricultural industry within Scotland, so that includes farmers, crofters, and we provide practical, emotional and financial support. Stress and mental health play a big role within Scottish agriculture and agriculture within the UK, with increased isolation, the cancellation of agricultural shows like the Royal Highland Show, as well as local marts being unable to attend there. So there was a definite increase in people feeling isolated, increased stress and anxiety, and not being able to see neighbours and family. They may need support to get through that period.
Unfortunately, the stories we've heard here today are all too familiar. That's why at RABI we're building routes to resilience. We need to make these everyday conversations a normal occurrence.
RABI will always be here to support farming people during times of crisis, but we don't want to be. We want people to access support early, before challenges become real issues.
Thankfully, there's a real appetite to work together to help address the challenges facing our community. We can all play our part.
Fine looking dairy beef cattle in that video. The farmer there must really know what he's doing. Thank you to RABI and RSABI. I think the message around mental health is more important than ever right now, and from both an individual farmer and an OFC point of view, thank you for the continued work that you do. Welcome, delegates, and also to our very special guest, Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, to the Inspiring Farmers session. I'm Will Evans, one of the OFC directors, and this is one of the plum jobs at the conference, chairing this session, because you get to ring people up and say, we think you're very wonderful and inspiring, and would you like to speak at our conference? To which they invariably reply, thank you, but I don't think I'm very inspiring at all. Well, I'll leave you to decide for yourselves about that over the next hour or so, but I know what I think. This session is being moderated by my talented and very handsome friend and fellow director, Ben Taylor-Davis. So please do send your questions for the speakers to us via the OFC app. And please also share your thoughts on Twitter using the hashtag OFC22. I'm going to keep this very brief as I want to leave maximum time for Q&A at the end. So without further ado, let's go to our first speaker, Simon Best. Simon runs Acton House Farm in partnership with his parents and brother Rory in County Armagh in Northern Ireland. Simon studied agriculture at the University of Newcastle before embarking on a career in professional rugby, where he represented Ireland 23 times, playing in 2 World Cups before retiring through injury in 2007. There have been many lessons from professional sport that Simon has applied to running the farm business, and he's going to share insights into this applied learning with you all now. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Will. The 26th of September is a day that will always stand out for me, not because it's the date by which I hope to have started drilling, or even the date that I hope to have finished harvesting late beans. It's the day that my career as a professional rugby player came to a shuddering halt after I suffered a mini stroke midway through the 2007 Rugby World Cup in France, where I was playing for Ireland. Up to that point, over the previous 10 years, I had played 23 times for Ireland and 124 times for my club Ulster, captaining both teams during that time. My opportunity to pursue a career in professional sport came almost out of the blue. I just started a degree in agriculture at Newcastle University when the sport that I had loved since I was a small boy turned professional literally overnight. Sir John Hall, famed Northeast property developer and then financier of Newcastle United Football Club, saw an opportunity and invested in the local rugby club, and the rest for me was history. I left Newcastle 3 years later with a degree in the 2 things that I was absolutely passionate about, agriculture and rugby. However, on that warm late summer's day in Bordeaux, it felt like my world had collapsed. I was diagnosed with a TIA, a stroke where fortunately the symptoms resolve after 12 hours, and an irregular heartbeat. 4 months out from my 30th birthday, I was told my rugby career was over. Fortunately for me, with the encouragement and probably no shortage of arm twisting from my parents, I'd focused on my degree and continued to keep what was probably a light hand in the running of the family farm. After a few months of wallowing, the strong will and desire to achieve that had stood to me so well in my rugby career came thundering back, and I was determined not to be remembered simply as a retired rugby player. It's a real honour to have been asked to speak at this conference. I've had the pleasure of being here as a delegate before, and sitting in the audience on that occasion, I remember thinking how daunting it must be to present at such an esteemed event. My name is Simon Best, and I run Acton House Farm in County Armagh, Northern Ireland. As you've heard, in partnership with my parents and my brother Rory, also a former professional rugby player, having just recently retired as Ireland rugby captain, and also a British and Irish Lion to boot. We're mainly an arable farm, growing wheat, barley, oilseed rape, and oats under higher level environmental stewardship for White's Oats, whose mill is less than 5 miles from the farm. We're LEAF accredited and have been in environmental schemes for the past 20 years. We also run a 60 cow pedigree Aberdeen Angus herd. Today, I want to give you an insight into some of the learnings that I've taken and applied from a life in professional sport, and how it's helped me to transition into farming and to continue to drive what is now a 4th generation farming business at Acton House Farm into the future. We hear the term sustainability used in a number of contexts, but for me, it's rooted in the concept of maintaining and enhancing. In the context of professional sport, we always speak about leaving the jersey in a better condition than you found it. From your first game, this is drilled into you. If, as an individual within the team, you focus on this simple mantra, then invariably the rest will follow. When applied to farming, I think this phrase really embodies the ethos of our farm. We do not inherit this land from our ancestors, we borrow it from our children. It's what my father has done and my grandfather before him and his father. To me, this is true sustainability. We are here after 100 years, and we're planning now to ensure that the land that we are custodians of will be here for the next 100+ years. It's the bedrock of why we farm as we do. This fundamentally is our purpose, or sometimes referred to as our why. And I feel strongly that understanding why we exist as an organisation, a team, or even an individual is the key to ensuring long-term success. I was once told that the two most important days of your life are the day that you're born and the day that you figure out why. If the first slide's articulated, excuse me, why we get out of bed in the morning, our vision is the guiding principle that underpins what we do. This is an excerpt from a piece of work that I led for my club, Ulster, a number of years ago when we had lost our way somewhat. We'd endured some challenging times both on and off the pitch. Central to this work was creating and re-establishing our vision of what we represent as a club. And for Ulster, there's a proud history and a loyal following across all communities. And this simple statement allows all involved to communicate what we are about. With regards to our own business at Acton House, our vision is production of high quality food ingredients in an ethical and sustainable manner. Now, I make no apologies for having the word production front and centre. It's what we do in terms of the crops we grow or the beef from our Angus cattle. However, we're on the journey to ensure that this is done in a manner that is consistent with our purpose of long-term sustainability. And this really helps to align the organisation. Communication of what we do to the public, to the community, to our customers and wider stakeholders is really important as we as farmers enter a period of uncertainty in agriculture with climate targets and basic payment restructuring. They say if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And in pro sport, everything is measured. From what you lift, to how fast you run, to what you've had for breakfast. This used to drive me mad at times, but now that I'm leading a business, I can see why this is the case. These show some of the data that is now collected to analyse team performance and essentially hold players accountable to standards. For me, this is essential to driving high performance and to encourage innovation. Some examples of what I track on farm: soil analysis, including organic matter and soil carbon. For me, a focus on soil health and improvement is the key foundation to ensuring efficient production and long-term sustainability. Knowing the status and health of our soils is imperative. Yield and margin, everything we produce is put over the weighbridge, and it's really important for me to know what we've produced, not only so I know whether we've made any money or not, but to gauge how successful we are with our use of inputs that we've used. SAP and tissue analysis to ensure efficiency of resource input and crop needs. With no two seasons being the same, particularly in my part of the world, understanding what the crop needs at key stages throughout the growing season allows me to ensure that we only apply what is required. Another key to integrated pest management. And our environmental enterprise, and you'll see that I've put the word return there. In respect of the environmental initiatives that we implement, I feel it's crucial to treat these like any enterprise on the farm. I need to see return on the investment and time, not only to underpin the message to the public and stakeholders, but also to our own team who put in all the effort year in, year out. These are some examples of what I mean by that. In the bottom left, you'll see some bird surveys that we carry out with our SPB on an annual basis. And in the top right, some otter surveys that I do with Ulster Wildlife. And otters, as I'm sure you'll know, are a great indicator species for good water quality. Working with our environmental stakeholders to measure the success of interventions and habitats, and then knowing firsthand what they do to encourage biodiversity. Really crucial when it comes to selling our message. Celebrating success, one of the most important most obvious elements of sporting context, and something any sportsman who retires struggles with most: understanding what success looks like. For my sporting days, this was so obvious. You knew where you stood every week in life. Did we win or lose on Saturday? And you'll hear coaches or managers talking about seasons not being won or lost in one game. And that's usually after their team have lost. But as players, you simply never want to lose. There's also significant momentum built on the confidence that comes from gaining success. There's a photo there which you may not be able to see entirely, but it's of my brother and Rory and I in the Irish changing room after the Ireland team had won the Triple Crown trophy for the first time in 19 years. And for those unaware, that's where you beat England, Scotland and Wales in one season. Ireland had only won 6 Triple Crowns in the preceding 100 years, but went on to win 5 in the next 12 years. In that time, Ireland also beat the mighty All Blacks for the first time in history, and went on to do it a further 2 times during that period. Examples of real momentum from understanding, celebrating and planning success. In farming, or indeed most walks of life, knowing what success looks like can be far less clear. For me, one of the attractions of farming is the seasonality and the fact that you get a real sense of achievement, or unfortunately sometimes underachievement, at harvest time. This year, having been nominated and not wanting to undermine someone's confidence in me, I entered the Farmers Weekly Arable Farmer of the Year award. Even though I thought a relatively small arable farm from a livestock dominated region had absolutely no chance against my peers in the arable hotbeds of the east of England. However, it gave me the opportunity to write down all the initiatives that we've been doing over the past number of years, and to actually take a moment to consider what success looks like for us. Furthermore, actually winning the award has been a real endorsement for me, our team, and our loyal stakeholders of the direction of travel of our business, and how future success is not likely to hinge solely on output. So finally, I want to talk about the glue that brings this all together, and that's continuous improvement and innovation. For me, looking back at the past 40 years, there's been an extraordinary journey, from grain mountains to set aside, back to production again, and now on to environment and climate change, all perhaps shaped by policy, but driven by the innovation and progression of our great farmers. My next focus is on carbon and understanding what our true verifiable carbon baseline is, before we start to talk about how much we need to reduce or mitigate, or whether we can sell a surplus. I'm currently taking part in a European Innovation Partnership project along with 6 other farmers from Northern Ireland. During the course of year 1, we've carried out soil carbon analysis at 10 and 30 centimetre cores, LiDAR analysis to create nutrient runoff maps, and accurately measure the carbon in our above ground biomass, our trees and our hedges. We've done in-depth soil nutrient analysis, we've assessed current gross carbon emissions, and carried out modelling the impact of different land uses on carbon emissions, all with a view of not only establishing that verifiable baseline, but then devising strategies to mitigate and reduce future carbon emissions. It's a fascinating experience, and there's been great progress under the leadership of one of our 7 participating farmers, Dr. John Gilliland, who many of you will be aware. And I'm confident that work of this type will not only underpin the future of our farm, but many others, and help to ensure we continue to fulfil our purpose and hand that jersey on to future generations in a sound condition. To that end, I'll wrap up on a quote that I feel describes the continuous improvement and innovation that is the core of our great industry. Live like you're going to die tomorrow, but farm like you're going to live forever. Thank you very much for listening. Thanks to the directors of Oxford Farming Conference 2022 for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. It's been a privilege, despite the great shame that we can't be there in person, but I trust you'll all enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. That was absolutely fantastic. Really, I think that the analogy of handing the jersey on will have struck a chord with an awful lot of people watching. So next up, we have Kate Rowell. Kate is a 5th generation sheep and suckler cow farmer from a hill and upland farm near Peebles in the beautiful Scottish borders. Kate trained as a veterinary surgeon in 1995 and in 2005, along with her husband, took over the farming business from her parents. Kate's been chair of Quality Meat Scotland since October 2018, and she participated in the Scottish Enterprise Rural Leadership Programme in 2015-16 and was chosen as an emerging leader at the Oxford Farming Conference in 2018, what was the old name for our Inspire programme. And unluckily enough for her, she was with me in that group, but we are delighted to have her back now. Kate, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Will, and it was a fantastic time, and you were the bonus at the end of that programme, meeting you and all the rest. Anyway, I am just going to tell a little bit about my story. As Will said, my name is Kate Rowell. I'm a 5th generation farmer on a 750 hectare upland farm, and I run it with my husband Ed. We've got 75 suckler cows and 850 Scotch mules and Scottish blackface ewes. And this is Hundleshope. The farm ranges from about 800 feet at the steading up to around 2,200 feet at the top. And Dad always said that we've got some of the best flat ground in the county, but the very worst hill. I was always interested in farming. I used to follow Dad about everywhere, and my favourite toys were my wooden farmyard and animals. But I do have a very distinct memory of an elderly auntie coming to see us and saying to my little brother, who must have been about 3 at the time, that he would take over the farm where he grew up. I can still remember how cross I was that she said it to him and not to me. After all, I was the eldest and I couldn't see why I would be left out. I think it was probably the first time that I came across the concept of gender inequality in the farming world. So when I was 16, I went to a careers event at school, and there was someone there from an agricultural college who I spoke to for a while. And I came home that night all fired up for a career on the farm. And I announced to Dad that I would be leaving school and coming home to work. He promptly announced back to me that that certainly wasn't happening. And some heated discussions followed. And we eventually came to the compromise that I would stay on at school, get some sort of qualification afterwards. It didn't matter what. And then I'd be very welcome to come home. I imagine his thinking was that I'd take another path and that would be the end of it. And to be fair, he did tell my brother exactly the same thing. So it wasn't anything to do with me being a girl. So I had to decide what else to do. And I very quickly came to the conclusion that the most useful thing to study would be vet medicine. Think of all the future savings in vet bills. I applied for and got into the Royal Dick Vet in Edinburgh and went off for a wild, intense and jam-packed 5 years of vet school, as you can see. It was hard work alongside equally hard play, and I made a lot of good friends. And it was also one of the best things that Dad ever did, as it got me off the farm, out of Peebles, and it showed me that there was a whole different world out there. I graduated in 1995, and the next step was to get a job. Mum and Dad weren't ready to retire yet, and the farm really couldn't support all of us. So I scoured the vet record and was drawn to an advert for an assistant in a 2-vet mixed practice in County Durham, mainly because the job came with a Land Rover. I actually had no idea where County Durham was at that point. It sounded like it might be in Ireland, but I rang up anyway and I spoke to the boss, Diana, and she invited me for an interview. Before I set off, I did manage to discover where it was, although in those days before sat-nav, I did get lost on the way and ended up over an hour late for the interview. But that didn't really matter because Diana had completely forgotten she'd arranged it, and she eventually turned up 2 hours later. We got on like a house on fire, and by the time I left, I had a job, a flat above the surgery, and the coveted Land Rover. The practice was in Weardale, in the Durham Dales, and it's one of the most welcoming places I've ever been to. Everyone was so friendly, and I was very quickly integrated into the community. And I bought a cottage next to the pub, as you can see. It was very James Herriot, with old-fashioned farms, a wide variety of animals to treat, and a very eccentric boss. And the 6 months that I'd originally planned to stay there turned into 6 years. I met a local farmer called Ed, and in 1999 we got married and had our daughter Alex. I suffered really badly from hyperemesis when I was pregnant. That's a really severe and uncontrollable form of morning sickness. And I ended up in hospital on a drip 8 times during the 9 months. I'd be examining a dog in the consulting room and have to nip through the back to throw up in the sink. And then when I was still working at 8 months pregnant, Diana was kicked by a horse and ended up in hospital for a week. So I was running the practice on my own. Thankfully, she recovered and I was back to work before, and she was back to work before I actually went into labour. The job got a bit harder after Alex came along. All your big ideas about children not changing your life very quickly go out the window. I had to go back to work full time when she was just 4 months old. And it was really hard juggling a baby who wouldn't sleep, work during the day, and especially a 1 and 2 on-call rota. We were managing though, and it was getting a wee bit easier. And then February 2001 came along. The 4th diagnosed case of foot and mouth was one of our clients, and that was the beginning of a nightmarish 6 months. We were right in the middle of one of the worst hit areas, and we had clients who were also friends being taken out every week. They were crying out for vets to help the ministry, so Diana went off to work with them, and I was left running the practice 24/7 on my own. It was an extremely difficult and emotional time, and when it was eventually over, I was completely burnt out, and we made the decision to move back to Scotland. Luckily, Dad didn't back out of the deal that we'd made all those years before, and he and Mum moved down to Peebles so that we could have the farmhouse. In 2003, we had twin boys, David and Joseph, again accompanied by horrendous hyperemesis. And in 2005, Michael came along 5 weeks early to complete the family. When we moved back up, Ed was immediately asked to come along to the local NFUS branch meetings. And that was absolutely fine, as he needed to get to know people, and 3 babies under 18 months was keeping me pretty busy. However, I was pretty taken aback a year later when I was told, and not by Ed, I hasten to add, that I wasn't welcome at the branch AGM because women didn't go. I must admit, I took the huff a bit with NFUS at that point, and I wouldn't have anything to do with them for years. The other organisation I was keen to get involved with was our local agricultural show, Peebles. Dad was president when I was 10, and I could remember watching him lead the Grand Parade round the ring and thinking, I'm going to do that someday. I helped with setting up and running the show throughout my school and university life, and I always managed to get home for it even after I started work. So I was kind of expecting a phone call once we moved back home, and you can imagine how I felt when that call came, and they asked Ed if he wanted to join the committee. To his credit, he took one look at my face and turned them down. I think he valued our marriage. I was absolutely furious. But this time, instead of taking the huff, I was a bit more mature, and I spoke to one of the committee members to let them know how I felt. Next thing I knew, I was on the Council of Management, then Junior Vice President. I've realised since then that I took it very personally as a rejection of me, but that actually, because the committee was mostly men, it just didn't occur to them that a woman might want to get involved instead of her husband. I think this unconscious bias is one of the biggest hurdles that we still have to tackle in agriculture, although things are getting better. Once I joined, I wasn't treated any differently to anyone else, and I went on to become the first female president in the show's 130-year history in 2015. It was an extremely proud moment for me, and I even got to ride a camel, as you can see in the photo. In 2012, Ed and I were chosen to be QMS monitor farmers, and we hosted 18 meetings of local farmers over a 3-year period. It was a really fantastic experience and helped our business a lot in both financial and efficiency terms. But the biggest result for me was the self-confidence it gave me to call myself a farmer. So up until then, I'd still been describing myself as a vet when I spoke to people, even though I hadn't been in practice for nearly 10 years. But the monitor farm experience made me realise that I was a farmer, and I should have the confidence to introduce myself as that. I think it's often the case, even now, that men are assumed to be farmers until they show themselves otherwise, whereas women are assumed not to be until they can prove that they are. And this is sometimes a feeling even within ourselves. At the end of the project, I applied for the Scottish Enterprise Rural Leadership Programme. And during the course of that, I met many more fantastic people, most of whom are now really good friends. I'd heard the programme described as life-changing, but was a bit sceptical about that, really. I shouldn't have been. It really can be. And then in 2018, I was chosen to be an Oxford Farming Conference Emerging Leader, as Will said. And along with 14 others from across the UK, including him, I attended the Oxford Farming Conference in January that year, and that was another amazing experience. It really brought home to me the truly global nature of food production in a way that we sometimes forget when we're devoting all our energies to keeping our businesses successful and profitable. And it gave me another group of fantastic people to add to my support network. Around the same time I was doing the Rural Leaders Programme, I noticed an advert for QMS board members in the Scottish Farmer. QMS, or Quality Meat Scotland, to give it its full title, is a Scottish red meat levy body and also runs the quality assurance schemes which cover Scotch beef and Scotch lamb. In the photo are an example of the wide variety of work the team do. I mentioned it to Ed and he said I should go for it. I still wasn't really sure though if I was the sort of person that they were looking for, but then I spotted a little sentence at the bottom of the ad which made a big difference to me. It said something like, QMS welcomes applications from underrepresented groups, including women. That was a real light bulb moment for me, as it made me realise that I actually was the sort of person that they were looking for. And so I applied, got an interview, and was astounded to be selected to join the board. And then about 3 years ago, the chair of QMS, Jim McLaren, came to the end of his term of office, and the position was advertised. Again, I wasn't sure at all whether I should apply to it. I'm just a farmer after all, and I didn't really expect to have any chance. But a piece of advice I was given years ago was to take any opportunity that comes along. So I went for it and was appointed in October 2018. I really couldn't believe it and actually still have to pinch myself occasionally. Being QMS chair has been an amazing experience, and I know how lucky I've been to get this chance. There have been many challenges and no doubt more to come, but I've learned so much about other parts of the red meat supply chain, which I hadn't even thought about before. And I've met hundreds of interesting people who've taught me a great deal. And at least pre-COVID, no 2 days were ever the same. One of the things I most enjoyed about being a vet and about being a livestock farmer is the variety of the work, and being QMS chair is no different. For example, I can be cleaning out gutters at home in the morning, doing a farm visit with Her Royal Highness Princess Anne in the afternoon, and speaking at a local farmers meeting in the evening. The virtual world we're in at the minute isn't quite so exciting, but at least there are still real drains to clean out. That's one of my favourite jobs. When Will asked me to speak at this session, I really wondered how on earth my story would inspire anyone. I'm just an ordinary farmer after all, and Simon has a Wikipedia page, for goodness sake. But Will insisted that that was the whole point. And I suppose he's right. It's often seeing others who we can relate to or who are like us achieving things that then pushes us to have a go ourselves. We all need a role model. I suffer as much from imposter syndrome as anyone else, and still occasionally wonder that I might be discovered. But a very wise friend of mine once said that it's important to realise that everyone feels like that at some point. And if they don't, they probably shouldn't be trusted. And she was right. And when people publicly admit that they feel the same, it can help enormously to discover that it's not just you. Believe it or not, I'm actually quite a shy person who can feel uncomfortable pushing myself forward. And I used to absolutely hate speaking up in front of a group of people or in a meeting. I spent ages looking for that perfect public speaking course or magic training session, which would somehow transform me overnight into an outgoing, confident person. I never had any luck, but in 2017, I was lucky enough to meet one of my role models, Minette Batters, at a Women in Agriculture event in Edinburgh where she was speaking. She explained to about 200 people in the auditorium that she used to feel very similar, and the introductions round the table at the start of the meeting were her worst nightmare. I was astounded and over the moon. At last, I'd found someone who could point me to that magic ingredient that would make me more confident. After all, she'd obviously found it to reach her position. I took my courage in both hands and went down at the end to introduce myself. And I asked Minette how she'd gone from that shy person to the one standing up in front of all those people and speaking so confidently. She gave me one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had, and it really changed everything for me. She said, "You just do it. You do it again and again and again, and it gets a bit easier every time." There is no magic wand, incredible course, or miraculous trainer. You just have to take a deep breath and do it. And eventually, all those experiences add up to the person that you are today. And they don't all have to turn out well and be positive experiences. It can be just as valuable when you get knocked back. I applied and was rejected for a Nuffield scholarship after absolutely tanking the interview in London, which was a hideous experience and really disappointing at the time. But looking back, it just added to the things I've done, which have got me to the life I have today. So I'll just finish with two little pieces of advice. Firstly, I did get over my childish temper tantrum with NFUS a good few years ago, and I started going to branch meetings, and I even eventually made it to the local AGM. I've learned that it's much better to engage and talk to people than to take the huff or fall out with them. After all, nobody was ever insulted into changing their minds on anything. And secondly, I'd encourage everyone to take every one of those opportunities when they come along. It doesn't matter if you're just a farmer. You just need to do it again and again and again, and you'll end up being whatever you want to be. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Kate. That was absolutely fantastic. And I wish I'd worn my farmer's husband t-shirt now that I shared a picture with you of the other day. Next, we have a pre-recorded video from Zanna Joice, who unfortunately couldn't be with us today, but fortunately for Zanna, she is in Sydney and has been watching Australia, her native Australia, thrash England in the Ashes. So who's the lucky one? Zanna is originally from Sydney, but she relocated to Norfolk in 2008. After backpacking around the world, Zanna married Patrick, her husband, and joined the pioneering poultry family-run farm in North Norfolk. Sadly, in 2018, their lives turned completely upside down with her husband's terminal cancer diagnosis and subsequently with Patrick developing severe depression. I did nearly 190 interviews for Rock and Roll Farming Podcast, and the one I did with Patrick and Zanna was the one I'm most proud of. Zanna, take it away.
You have cancer. It is terminal. These are the words that my husband was told in March 2018. I can remember that day like it was yesterday, sitting in that small little room with the doctor knee to knee talking to us. Having been married 9 years and with 2 small children, aged then 8 and 5, this was not the news that any of us expected coming down the line. Your whole world just changes in an instant. Everything that you'd hoped, dreamed, and planned on has gone in that instant. And after a diagnosis like that, you can only imagine that it wasn't long until the dark cloud of depression came following down the line. Patrick was like most men. He didn't believe in depression. He didn't believe in stress and anxiety. He was the first person to admit that anyone who suffered with any of those situations were bone idle. They were lazy. They needed a good kick up the backside. It was only when it came knocking on his door that he realised the true extent of what depression really was and how big it is in the area that we all work in. For Patrick, the terminal nature of the disease meant that he knew he was never going to see the visions of what he wanted for the farm to be seen through. He was never going to see his kids grow up, and he was never going to grow old with me. And having all the treatment that he was going through, he lost his sense of purpose and his sense of self. Anyone that knew Patrick would tell you that he was a fun-loving, kind, caring, passionate, mischievous person. But he was also extremely hardworking and determined to do good within the industry. His love of the farm and working within the industry helped him be an integral part of the poultry industry program and the poultry industry itself, and worked alongside the NFU in lots of different areas. It was this formidable drive that was suddenly lost as these diseases took hold. Between the treatment and the doctor's appointments, I realised that things weren't quite right with him, and it took a long time for me to try and convince him that something wasn't quite right, though even then he still wouldn't acknowledge that there was a problem. The first real episode happened in the June following the diagnosis. It was not unusual for Patrick to wake up early hours of the morning and go wandering on the farm and check things, or come downstairs and do whatever. But that morning he woke up really early, and by 4 o'clock when I woke up, he still hadn't come back to bed. So I came downstairs to check on him, but he wasn't to be seen. We lived using the app Life 360, and so I jumped on there and had a look, and to my astonishment maybe, he was up at the coast, parked up in a spot, and the car wasn't moving and the phone wasn't moving. So my heart skipped a beat or two. I held my breath and I rang him. Thankfully, he answered the phone. He was sad, he was tearful, but he talked to me, and that was the most important part of it. We chatted for a while, and he said, look, I'm okay, I'll come home, just not yet, but I'll come home. I was like, okay, fine. It took 3 hours for him to come home that morning. I sat here, and I watched that dot move along the coastline, park up, move on again, park up. I did what any girl did, and I rang their mum on the other side of the world, the bonuses of time differences, and thankfully she was able to keep me calm for part of that time. At that moment I realised that I was stuck in a situation. I couldn't go and find him, I couldn't go looking, I couldn't go searching, because I had 2 small children still in bed asleep. And that was the day that I realised that actually I was torn between a husband that was severely depressed and a family that I still need to look after. When he finally did come home that morning, he was a completely different person. The only way I can describe it was that his body had given up on him. He was, I'm assuming, so mentally exhausted that he could hardly walk. How he drove, I have no idea. But he got back, he stumbled up the stairs, and I managed to get him to bed. Through the tears and the emotions, managed to get him to sleep. That day was also the day that the knot of anxiety and fear formed in my tummy and wouldn't leave. I had to make a decision of how I looked after both my family and Paddy, and I then had to turn and rely on so many different people to be able to help me, from family to friends, that I could call on when something was wrong or when I felt that there was a problem. As much as I want my kids to know about the story of depression with their dad, I didn't want them to ever see the suffering that he went through and the struggles, because they were too young to understand depression. I mean, gosh, it was hard enough for them to get their head around cancer, let alone depression. So from that day onward, I became addicted to Life 360 app, and I would monitor that thing like a hawk. But it worked for us, and he understood the reasons why I did it. And he always felt that he was a burden to me, but my God, he was never a burden to me. It was always me wanting to make sure that he was okay, because that's what love you do with loved ones. I also realised that day that he needed some help. And through our local GP, I got him to see a counsellor at the surgery. But what I witnessed that day was quite extraordinary. I watched him completely and utterly pretend that nothing was wrong with him. He put on the mask, he said that it was all stress related, but he was fine and everything was okay. And we walked out of that room with me feeling completely frustrated that he had hoodwinked the system, so to speak. It didn't take long for friends to realise that there were problems, and it was one day that I was out with a girlfriend who witnessed me receiving a phone call from Patrick in a real terrible state. He was at home with the kids had gone to bed, and he needed me, and I was nowhere around. And the panic and the stress of that evening will live with me forever. But she witnessed that, and she then made the conscious decision to ring a local charity called Zanna, which deals with mental health in agriculture. I'll be forever grateful to that friend who made that phone call. If it wasn't for her ringing them and then Zanna ringing us, we probably would have been stuck for a few more months. But because that phone call came through, Patrick actually had to deal with the situation, and we both started seeing counsellors. We also made the decision to make the long-awaited family trip to Australia, which had been cancelled when he was first diagnosed with cancer. In my gut, I did not think this was necessarily the right idea. As much as I wanted to go and was desperate to go and see my family, I didn't think it was going to solve the situation that we were presently in. And unfortunately, my gut rang true, and we went through some of the most darkest and horrendous days while we were out there on holiday. It was during that time that I finally got him to seek medical attention, and we got him to my family's GP in Australia, where the doctor there was able to explain to him that the brain can become broken, and just like any other part of the body, it needs the same amount of support and help. I thought once he went onto medication that things would even out a bit, but it didn't. We still had really bad times where it was the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. Unfortunately, it turned out that Patrick was the 1 in 100 that suffered that this medication didn't help, and therefore suffered with some manic depressive symptoms and some psychosis. This did lead to him trying to take his own life on a few occasions, but thankfully I was there to support him throughout this time. Something good did come out of our trip to Australia. Unbeknownst to me, Patrick had stumbled across the Naked Farmer Facebook page, which aims to break the stigma of mental health in agriculture. The idea of the page is you post a naked photo of yourself and a snapshot, I guess, of your mental health issues. When we got back here to England, Patrick went off into a shed and came back and said, "I've done this. I've taken a naked photo of myself and I'm going to post this on the social media site." I have to say at the time I was slightly apprehensive of it. I was worried that people would judge him. I was worried of the stigma and what people would think. But I have to say the response that he got was absolutely unbelievable. People far and wide spoke to him, opened up and talked about A, their own issues, but B, congratulated him on opening up himself. It wasn't long until local farming media took hold of it, and it actually went further afield with the UK farming media too. It was at this time that we realised that something really positive could come out of our really crappy situation. After seeing the articles in the newspaper, some friends of ours came to us with the idea of hosting a charity cricket day in support of Zanna. I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but Zanna is a local charity helping people in agriculture with mental health. This charity day gave Paddy a sense of purpose again, and he really threw himself into making the most of this opportunity and organising the event. The event was a huge success, and we raised over £53,000 for Zanna. I truly believe this was only possible because of the person that Patrick was and the support that he had gained through the momentum of him opening up and telling his story. The other significant thing about him opening up and telling his story was the amount of people that sent notes, emails, phone calls, or dropped in while passing by to actually tell them how thankful they were that he had opened up this story. The real positive thing that has come out of this whole story is the amount of people that have sent notes, made phone calls, texted him, emailed him, or dropped in and really opened up about their own situations and what they'd been going through the whole time. And we're thankful that he'd opened up the talking platform so people could actually open up themselves. The money that we raised helped Zanna to completely rebrand. It also helped them set up a new campaign to help prevent suicide. This was called the 7 Tractor Facts Suicide Prevention, which is now distributed nationally. The money also helped for a whole year of counselling for anyone that needed it. But the benefits to Zanna were far more than the money that was raised on the day. By Patrick opening up and telling his story, the helpline received more telephone calls in the 2 months leading up to the cricket day than it had in the previous 5. There was a greater uptake of the funded counselling that Zanna provides, and more people spoke openly about mental health and connected with the social media websites. 3 years on, and this has not stopped. People still talk about Patrick and the Naked Farmer Cricket Day. His memory still lives on, and so does his story, which has changed lives and hopefully saved lives. 3 years on, and this has not stopped. People still talk about Patrick and the Naked Farmer Cricket Day. His memory still lives on, and so does his story, which has changed lives and hopefully saved lives. Patrick showed that you could be male, working in farming, and admit that you need help and actively accept it, while speaking openly about the pitfalls of dealing with depression. His campaign to raise awareness about mental health was characteristic of the person that he was. I'm proud to sit here today and to continue talking openly about it. If by talking helps one more person and maybe saves another life, then I know that I've continued with his legacy.
Thank you to Zanna. I know she's not here watching, but she'll be watching back later, and I'm sure. And thank you so much, Zanna. I was there when that was recorded, and I still found it emotional watching again then, and I'm sure you all will have done at home. Last, but definitely not least today, Rhys Williams. Rhys is an innovative and well-known dairy farmer. He lives on the beautiful Llyn Peninsula in North Wales with wife Kelly and a very impressive 5 children, one more even than me. And from there, they run their business, R&KW Limited, which specialises in people, cows and grass. And to tell us all about it, here's Rhys. Rhys, stage is yours.
Thanks, Will. I'll just begin saying thank you very much. It's a great honour and privilege to have been invited to talk at the Oxford Farming Conference. Having listened to Simon, Kate and Zanna, and their exceptionally inspirational stories, it's a tough gig to follow, but I'll do my best. I'll start off with this picture. This is a picture taken on Ority Beach in New Zealand, Southland, New Zealand, on 27th October 2003. Quite a pivotal time in our lives. I was in my mid-20s, you know, spent quite a bit of time working on a dairy farm in Wales, then decided to hop over to New Zealand. And to be honest with you, we were thinking of making a life in New Zealand. And probably that's the first time probably in my life that I had clarity, and I had a dream, and I was quite convinced that we were going to reach the goal given time. It's probably helped that I was actually brainwashed by a lot of Kiwis, which certainly helped. Fast forward nearly 20 years, and this is us now, myself, Kelly, and our 5 young kids, not in New Zealand, but on the Llyn Peninsula in North Wales, which is a fantastic place to have landed. Life is full of excitement, as you can see, and this is one of the biggest achievements in my life, probably, was being able to give our kids, the next generation, the upbringing that I had. Bit of background on myself. I was born and bred in the Conwy Valley, which is in North Wales on the foothills of Snowdon. My mother and father, we had a small 10-acre small holding. They both worked in agriculture. So there was quite a strong, even though we didn't, we had a small holding, there was no, but I was very keen on farming since a very young age. Didn't want to do anything else really. So from school, went on to the Welsh Agricultural College in Aberystwyth, which was fantastic. Had a lot of fun and learned a lot. From then on, I went to work as a herdsman on a farm in Denbigh in North Wales, which was again a big part of my early life. But it was in that part that I got the chance to go to New Zealand very early on in my life. I wasn't even 20. And I worked for a company called Marvin Farm Services in the North Island, based in Matamata. It was a relief agency where you spent, 6 months to 12 months, and you were hopping from one farm to another as relief. And that gave me an insight to the way of farming in New Zealand. And probably I had exposure to their share farming systems as well, which I thought was fantastic. And it was a real good way of getting into farming if you didn't have much behind you from a very young age. So those two things, I just, from a very early on, I loved cows, and I got the grass bug when I was in New Zealand, and then that just hasn't gone away. So basically, in early 2000s, myself and Kelly, we went over to New Zealand full time. As you can see from that picture in the beginning, we were chasing a dream, and it was quite a big dream, quite a big goal at the time we put in place, which we said we want to be milking 500 cows in 5 years on our own accord, which that was just it, plain and simple. And New Zealand is a funny old place when you're there, but when they appreciate people who have got good work ethic, who are willing to just get their heads down and work. So we were basically, we started on a conveyor belt over there. I was involved with a family, very good family, so they knew our dream as well. But it was during that time we came across a Welsh landowner, farmer, David Wynfinch, and he had a dream. He had a beef and sheep farm on the Llyn Peninsula. Quite a large unit, 300 hectares, and he wanted to convert his farm to a dairy farm, not an usual dairy farm in Wales, but a New Zealand style dairy farm. And he offered us a route back to Wales, and he asked us if we were willing to come home and do something with him. And said, look, more than happy to come home, because, we wanted to get married, we wanted to, have kids, and having kids speaking Welsh and being able to, raise them in the Welsh community was always a dream for us as well. So we said, right, we'll come home, but, we want to be involved. We still had this 500 cow goal in place. We either want to be milking cows in a partnership, or we just didn't want to be milking cows for a wage. So David said, yes, come home, we'll do something. So we came home in July 2004, and by that time David had already purchased 800 Jersey heifers to get in calf. So by February 2005, we started milking 800 Jersey heifers, all imported in from Denmark at that point, because it was it was purely impossible to get good grazing stock in the UK at that point. So we opted for the best option, was the Jersey heifers from Denmark with high health status. So just quickly in a nutshell, our growth of business went from 800, we started off with David with 800 cows, and we started off with a small percentage of those cows. That percentage quickly grew over a period of 3 to 4 years. We went up to owning 50% of that business with David. Converted another farm within in that period, so we were growing at a rate of about 12% growth every year, and still selling off a lot of surplus stock. So it was all organic growth. And this was between 2005 and 2010, and it'd been a roller coaster ride. It'd just been manic, and very enjoyable, hugely enjoyable. Just loved it. But I knew I had to take some time out, or I had to do something, because I was working. We were working very hard. During this time as well, we had 4 young kids at that point. 3 young kids, 1 on the way, and life was just full on. And luckily for me, I got persuaded by a good friend of mine, another New Zealander, Tom Phillips, who was a consultant in the UK here, to apply for an Uphouse scholarship. And I thought, I'm never going to get an Uphouse scholarship. Why would they give it to me? Anyway, I got it. And the topic I was studying was wealth creation in dairy farming. And it, again, that was a big point in my life. Just changed a lot of things, changed the way I thought. And it was quite interesting what Kate said in the earlier thing, that I hadn't realised at that point that we were a bit, there's a lot more. When you're in the grind of it, you just think about your industry or what you're doing. But it's global farming is just so fascinating, and I came across so many passionate people on my travels, and it just made me completely rethink about what we were doing. So in 2012, after finishing the Uphouse scholarship, one thing I had forgotten about during the previous years was my one dream from when I was a real small kid running around the Gwynedd Valley was to have just have a farm ownership. And we were very fortunate, luckily, that the opportunity came up on the Llyn Peninsula, and we were able to buy a 200-acre farm, and it was a beef and sheep unit. So that was converted into a dairy farm. So at this point, 2012, we actually, our business, we went back, bought a farm and started again on our own, not so much in a big share farming enterprise. And today, our farming enterprise has evolved again. We have now, from January this year, we've got 5 dairy units, all located on the west of North Wales, 3 on the Llyn Peninsula, and two on Anglesey. They're a mixture of owned land, tenanted farms on farm business tenancies, and we have one share farming operation still going as well. There's probably about 18 of the cows over the 3 units, but it's worked. We've concentrated quite a lot over the last couple of years of actually pulling the business closer together, because we have been farming much further afield as well in previous years. So just touching quickly on the cow ownership, R&KW, which is the company Kelly and myself owns 1,400 cows basically. The rest of the cows are owned by other people who we are in partnership with. And what I mean by this, mainly they are the people on the ground managing the units. They all have a stake in in the business, you know, from a small percentage to a larger percentage. Just quickly, I just think it's very important. The cows we've bred since the day we started with the Old Danish Jersey, fantastic cow to start off with, but we have developed the cow a lot over the years, and basically we've just been using New Zealand semen, and we've bred what we call the Kiwi cross cow, which is a Frisian cross Jersey hybrid cow, designed to convert grass into milk, basically. They're medium-sized cows, 500 kilos to 550. The yield per year would be about 5,500 litres to 6,000 litres, with extremely high fat and protein content. All the units would be spring calving, block calving, calving in a very tight 10-week block. Probably have 50% calved in 14 days. So February for us, February is manic.
Rhys, I'm just going to jump in and say the time's really pushing on. We haven't got an awful lot of time left, so just wondering whether you could, sorry, but could you just cut out maybe a couple of slides and then...
Yeah, I'll chase it. Grazing management.
Thanks, Rhys.
Business management. I'll get right through to the nitty-gritty what we're about then. Business structure. Each unit is run totally independent. Each manager, farmer, I like to call them farmers because I like to develop people into farmers in their own accord. So they're in charge of their farm, they're in charge of their admin. I'd have weekly, fortnightly management, on some of them it'd be more like a social visit. The business structure we've developed, it gives people huge ownership. They are the farmer. I'm not the boss on those farms. They are the boss. They are the farmer. We put a system in place where they're in charge of their own destiny plus their earning potential, which is very important. They're accountable. As I said before, I just, I'm not the boss. The people that we want to attract, and they have to be a certain type. They have to be ambitious, very driven, hungry to learn. I think, humble, like to work. They have to have a team mentality, which is hugely important for us, and honesty. Generally, the recruitment of people would be generally between 16 and 22 years old when they come to us. We're very fortunate in where we are operating. We don't have no major big competing industries. The travel industry would be the biggest competitor to us. The holiday industry, plenty of part-time labour developing into full-time. And we do have by now a good reputation, developing people, and people come to us knowing that there is a route to being a farmer of their own accord on one day. We've developed even the coming to us at 16. It's still a very young age, so I'm very passionate about providing a learning environment. There'll be a lot of courses that'll be going on, discussion groups, traveling, and a lot of them spend quite a bit of time. They'd come to us for a couple of years, they go to New Zealand for a year or two, maybe travel to another country. I'm a big advocate of that. And they have to educate themselves. And yes, it's all about developing a culture. you know, and team ethic. You know, we are not a team because we work together. We are a team because we respect, trust, and care for each other. Thank you, listener. I'll leave you at that. Thanks, Will.
Thanks, Rhys. That was fantastic, and I know a lot of the younger conference audience will have got a huge amount of that, I'm sure, because there's always a lot of talk in farming about routes for progression in farming, and if you're from a non-farming background, how do you get into the industry? So I think that was fantastic. So thank you very much. We haven't got a huge amount of time for questions, but we have got a couple of really good ones come in. So I'll go straight in with a question. This is for Simon and for Kate, and we'll go to Simon first. You referred to moments in your life when you hit a low point. What day-to-day strategies did you use to pick yourself back up from that?
Yeah, very good question. I suppose the natural resilience, I guess I come from, I guess our background, you know, coming from a farm and seeing, you know, my dad, all the guys who work for us working so hard and sort of dealing with things that come out of the blue. I guess that was sort of ingrained in me, that, you know, you just sort of, not you get up and get on with it, but you sort of put it in perspective, and you realize that, look, things could be worse. And listening to some of the stories that we've listened to this afternoon, I think that's probably it. You just sort of, you deal with it and you move on, and you've got great support around you. And I was very, very fortunate to have that support around me and to be able to reflect on a great period of time up until that point. So I think perspective is the key there.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. And what about you, Kate? What strategies did you use?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that, really. Getting away from a situation and being able to look at it with sort of fresh eyes makes a huge difference. See yourself as others see you, as we say up here in Scotland. And also the support. I mean, one of the biggest pieces through my whole life has been the support networks that I've built up through all the different things I've done. And it just makes a huge difference, even if you don't speak to people every day or even every month. If you know they're there in the background, sort of have your back, it makes a huge difference to how you can move forward.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And a question, I'm going to aim this at Rhys, but what advice would you give new entrants to farming who are attempting to get their first step on the farming ladder, other than to give you a ring?
Yeah, never give up. You know, I think if they're passionate enough, and you know, if they're starting off from scratch, I would probably, the best piece of advice, you know, I got, especially when I was young, was, you know, go out there and find the best people you can to work for, and, you know, to then use them as mentors then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fantastic. And very quickly, and just a very sort of quick, sort of 10-second answer from all of you. What's your one takeaway for personal and business resilience? We'll go to Simon first. I
think making a plan and just resetting it to where you are in life. I suppose I got to a point where I had to retire from a professional sports career, and I had to look for something different. And I think sort of understanding that you may not get to that point again, but actually looking for something else and planning a new goal, I think is certainly something that has stood to me.
Yeah. Okay. And what about you, Rhys?
I think taking every day as it comes. You know, that's quite important. You know, I always tell my, you know, if we're doing something and it's a tough day, you know, tomorrow's another day. We go again. Because we are very fortunate to be working and living. You know, it's a fantastic industry. And you know, just taking a step back sometimes and just appreciating it. Yeah.
And last word from you, Kate.
Just like I said before, really, the support network, and when you need advice, ask for it, and when you ask for it, actually listen to it and act on it if you think it's good advice, and use all those people around about you that are there to support you and help you. Your V, as your goose V, as Doug Avery said.
So that's the mic drop moment there. Thank you, everybody. I found that incredibly inspiring. I'd like to sincerely thank all the speakers on behalf of OFC for talking so honestly and openly about their experiences. I think it's been a brilliant session and one that will live long in the memory. The content of today has been recorded, will be shared on demand after the conference, and delegates can access it in their website login area. One of the highlights of the conference, the famous OFC debate, starts at 7 o'clock this evening, so please do join us for that. We're all very much looking forward to some star performances this evening. And now I'm going to hand over to Barbara and Sarah in the studio, who will say a few words to close the day's sessions.